And hello world, it's Lee from Beach City, your entrepreneurial lifestyle channel, coming to you live from Plug and Play in Sunnyvale, California, aka Silicon Valley. And I'm here with Bow Rodgers, who is the executive in residence here at Plug and Play. Welcome to Beach City, Bow.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here and glad to be with some Australians.
Yeah, well, you were telling us a little bit of an Australian story before about your brown snake story. Do you want to share that one with us?
I like Aussies. I like Swan Lager. I like Perth. I raced with Dennis Conner on the America's Cup, so I was down there when that was happening. Not on the crew at the time, but good affinity for Australia.
Wow, you raced with Dennis Conner on the America's Cup crew?
I did, and we raced in particular in San Diego after they won legitimately. And I'm getting off here, but when this is when New Zealand did a kamikaze attack on us after we won legitimately in Perth. We're out of money, and he comes with a 505 to 120 feet long, and because he wanted to get the Mercury Yacht Club going down there and fund the property. I may get into trouble on this one. And the United States had no money, so we turned into going to catamarans from the legitimate America's Cup boat. So that's a little backstory, yeah.
Well, interestingly, we were, in 1983, fascinated with the America's Cup. Of course, the Aussies won it. Alan Bond took it home and beat Dennis Conner. Yeah. And now they've moved into this catamaran thing. I don't quite get that, but we are getting off track. We could probably talk sailing a bit more. Yeah. But, Bo, can you give us just a little bit of your backstory? Because obviously that's one of the interesting background stories about how you sort of arrived in the Valley.
Born and raised in San Francisco. I'm an entrepreneur. I worked at Apple Computer, got my butt kicked by Steve Jobs, and Apple, was group president of Sprint. I launched many of the Sprint technologies out here in the West, and have known Saeed Hamidi, very respected founder, has done a nice job building Plug and Play with all of his programs. I've been an entrepreneur, I've had a couple of good exits, and so that's what's brought me to this accelerator.
Right. And so you just touched on Apple. What sort of time frame were you involved with Apple?
I was at Apple Computer in the mid-'80s when we decided to move to corporate America. They'd done a marvelous job with K through 12, a marvelous job through universities. They had a VAR group, value-added reseller for kind of HVAC and Honeywells, and taking the guts of the Apple, putting it in there. But what the people felt with John Scully and Regis McKenna and the board of directors, if Apple can't get into corporate America, it won't be a complete company. Right. And so I was the suit that was brought in to help break that and bring Apple into corporate America, which we did, but I had many challenges in that process.
So, can you share a little bit of insight working with Steve Jobs?
No, because it'll probably be circulated here, and that's a building right over there. I'm probably being viewed by Apple, as it turns out. So no, all great, yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
And so maybe you can just share some of the companies that you started or were involved with?
Yes. A company called Power TV, and a company that actually created the operating system for digital cable set-top boxes. So the cable operators, the Comcasts, the Time Warners, those companies began to see, how do we begin to bring video? How do we begin to bring computer technology? How do we do those different services? We need a layer in an operating system to allow that to happen. Before, cable operators just provided you with television and movie-like opportunities. So our operating system did that, allowed for many of the bundled services, and so that was a good exit. We worked with Scientific Atlanta. Scientific Atlanta got purchased by Cisco, and so that was one of the good exits. And a couple of other companies that I've been involved with, but those are the promising ones.
Right, okay, amazing. And so, can you tell us a little bit about Plug and Play and what your involvement is with Plug and Play?
Well, you said it right. I'm an executive in residence, and Plug and Play is an accelerator, and as I mentioned to you, the difference, it's a full service area with a graybeard like me who's run companies, with legal services to evaluate the technology to see if the IP is protected, with payment services, with things to help immigration. So it's a full service opportunity. You pay a bit more, but we believe if you're going to fail fast. Come to a Plug and Play, bring your company. Either your country supports you, to pay for that, a university supports you to pay for that, or a local company is here, local startups are here, a lot of American companies, and really get yourself compared to all of the people in your sector, that tech sector. Then you can sit down and say, do we have a chance to make it? Now an investor says, I don't see the opportunity. You've got too much competition. You're not as sophisticated as the competition. I don't think we have the bandwidth to go. So this is an environment that's very good for that reason.
So we can just touch on the fail fast. I mean, what does that mean?
Well, what it means is if you've got a company beyond the back of envelope description, you've got a team, you've got some intellectual property, you've written some code, some attorney has looked and said you're not going to infringe on somebody, you are patentable, and now you want to go to market. So now that's when an investor comes in. An investor is going to come and look at your company, but compare it to other people in that sector, whether it's cryptocurrency, blockchain, Internet of Things, mobility. And now when I say fail fast, if you come in and it looks obviously like your technology is not superior to your competitors, you don't have the team capable of doing that, now an investor says, okay, I'm not going to throw good money after bad. Right. So that's exactly what that means in that process.
Right. And so for people outside of Silicon Valley, it's a little bit like, particularly in the tech, and I've been in tech for a long time myself, but it's a bit like the Disneyland, it's like the Holy Grail. They go to Silicon Valley, and people want to come into Silicon Valley, and they come in with ideas, and they might have some early traction or validation in their market at home, and then they come here, and they go into the dojo and they get belted up.
Right. Right.
So. Can you share some thoughts with that for aspiring entrepreneurs and people that may be looking to come to the Valley?
I can. The advice I would be to come for the right reason. Okay, if it's only to come to make money, like the starlet that goes to Broadway or to Hollywood, you'll end up disappointed. Okay, right. Likely. Okay, yeah. But if you come to grow and develop, you may come. Your company may fail, but the lessons in business management, in financially handling it, in hiring and recruiting, you might be able to build a standalone business that's very successful on its own, have a wonderful life, all as a result of what you came for. Right. So if you come for the right idea, and I give credit, full marks to Steve Jobs, let's build an insanely great company. Good things will happen. Yep. If you only come selfishly to get an exit, and that's your sole goal, I think you'll go home disappointed. For the most part.
Yeah, so again, we hear a lot of stories, particularly from the Australian companies that come over. They come over with a little bit of seed money and they sort of think, right, we're going to go and now take on San Francisco, and they land here and very quickly they burn through that cash. You can burn money here pretty quickly, like you can anywhere, but certainly in this market. And then they go home with their tail between their legs and they go, okay, now what? And the nuances of the market are very different. I've had my own experience with that. You might have validation in Australia, but it doesn't mean you necessarily, or product market fit in Australia, but it doesn't mean you've got product market fit here.
The only thing I'll comment about, and I really mean this not altruistically, is you don't have to go home with your tail between your legs. Right. If you had a business experience, you built a business, you had some ups and you had some downs, you're constantly learning. You're getting better and better. Does that make sense? And that's an MBA or a PhD in the real life of business. Yeah. So while tail between your legs may translate to my company didn't make it, you may come back and your team may come back as very much better business people. So the next time around, in round 2 or round 3, you're a lot better off. So I think it's worth the education. Excuse me.
I don't think, absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's one of the key messages that we keep putting out there. I struggle with this idea that somehow we failed or we succeeded, and the single metric is about the money. Right. And my own experience is that some of the most happiest times of my life have been when I've been bootstrapping, and when a bit of money comes, you maybe feel a little redundant, and you've exited, and now what do I do, right?
Right. And by the way, things are changing. I'm not seeing greed is overcoming some of the situations of I used altruistic, I use again, building a great company, solving the problems of the world, curing cancer, doing these very, bright and honorable things. I think the young entrepreneurs coming now are very keen to say, look, if I'm going to put my time and effort in this, I want a return. And that return happens to be dollars or pounds or some other form of currency. Yeah. So I don't fault people for that, because capitalism is often a very good stimulus. It's certainly happening in China, certainly building a lot of countries. But I still think that it's great to talk to an evangelist that's passionate about their technology or their company. Does that make sense? Because passion is palatable. It means to me that CEO is going to go the extra mile because they believe they're going to help somebody or do something beneficial, not just make a buck.
Right. And have you invested in companies, some of these early stage companies? Are you an active investor?
Yeah.
And so, again, if you're an investor that you weren't too sure about high growth technology companies, and particularly in Australia, a lot of our investment market's been based around mining. So there's a good understanding around that, but not so much around high growth companies. So
right.
what would your piece of advice be to an investor that's looking to enter that?
Well, if the investor did not have a unique particular knowledge of that, but wanted to get into early stage, okay, and I'm going to be your financial analyst, okay, take a look at your pie graph of all of the money that you have, okay? Some you'll put into equities, some you'll put into stocks, some you may put into real property. If you've got a little slice, I don't need to call it mad money, but it's money that's discretionary.
Yeah.
Then I think if you're not highly knowledgeable about the particular technology, build a good portfolio. In other words, do what's coming up, Bitcoin, blockchain, get into some investments in that, and if you can diversify that, I believe you'll have a good chance to bring some good results home.
Right.
I don't think anybody can time the market reliably. Somebody can win the lottery every day, but you're not going to bank on that, fair to say.
Yeah.
So, but if you dedicate as an entrepreneur or somebody who's coming to invest, get a diversification of a portfolio. I hope you have something in your gut that gives you some sense of that market. Does that make sense? But then I think if you diversify a few companies in there that are in that space, you'll likely do better than saying, I'm going to put it all on this particular company.
Right, I mean, it makes sense. So you diversify, and I suppose when you do, you can diversify too much where you diminish the return as well.
You're a mile wide and an inch deep, and then you don't get any home runs if you get anything. But I still suggest in that pie graph, diversify a little bit of different companies, maybe not camped one on the other, because then you've got conflict of interest, right? You don't want two horses that are going to, be right against each other. But again, I stand by saying, you asked me the question, if we came here with some money and we wanted to come away with some money, put it to a little more diversified area in those tech sectors that are on the wave up. Australians love to surf, find that wave and pick that wave, and I think you'll stand to do a better job.
Good analogy to use with me. I
there you
don't
go.
mind surfing.
No, there you go. So there you go.
Okay, so the final question. So when we diversify and we look at these companies, are we in for the short term or are we in for the long game?
Well, I think with startup companies, and this is interesting, the long term is not like maybe a bond fund or something 20, 30 years. I think here you're in, if you look at a VC probably starts a fund and within 10 years they wind it down. In other words, those life cycle of companies are probably have failed, they've become okay, or they've gone on to be successful, or maybe some home runs. So back to this situation, I think the timing is probably the 5 to 7 years. And as we heard today, some of the biotech companies may never get to market, but their intellectual property is so promising. A big pharma company, Johnson & Johnson, might say, snap that up. We want that now before they ever get to market.
Right.
So that could be a 2 to 3 year situation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Bo, fascinating. I could sit here and talk to you all day. Insights are awesome. Keep watching Facebook, Beach City Life. Check us out on YouTube. Bo, thank you very much for spending the time with Beach City today.
Good on.
Appreciate it.
Nice seeing you, Australian fans.
Thank you.